The evening rain drummed against the windows of Marco's Italian kitchen, casting wavering shadows across the dining room, while the smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the air, and Carlos Rodriguez stood at the hostess stand, dripping water from his delivery bag, checking the receipt one more time with trembling hands. If you believe service workers deserve honest treatment, like, share, and subscribe. Carlos had been delivering for 4 different restaurants for 2 years, biking through rain and snow because he couldn't afford a car, every delivery representing gas money saved, every tip representing groceries for his kids. Tonight's order had been huge, $800 worth of food for a corporate party, and the receipt clearly showed mandatory 18% gratuity, which should have been $144. But the man who'd signed the receipt had crossed out the gratuity line, written cash tip instead, and handed Carlos a crumpled $20 bill with a smirk that said he knew exactly what he was doing. Carlos stood there realizing he'd just been shorted over $100 over an hour of work at his day job, a week's worth of his daughter's lunch money, and his hands shook from the crushing weight of being cheated. The hostess had seen the exchange, her face showing sympathy but helplessness. "I'm sorry, Carlos, but there's nothing I can do. They're customers, and if I make a scene, I'll get fired." Carlos nodded, understanding, because that's what people like them did. They understood that standing up meant risking jobs they desperately needed, meant accepting that some people would always take advantage. The man who'd shorted him, designer suit, expensive watch, appeared in the doorway, his voice loud and dismissive. "You still here? I gave you a tip. Now get lost before I complain to your manager." Before Carlos could turn to leave, swallowing his anger because that's what survival required, a voice came from the kitchen doorway, sharp and clear. "Excuse me, sir, but there seems to be a problem with your order." Marco Benedetti, the restaurant owner, emerged wiping his hands on his apron, and despite being barely 5'6", his presence filled the entryway, his eyes moving from Carlos to the receipt with an expression that promised consequences. The suited man shifted to annoyance. "There's no problem. I paid my bill, gave the delivery guy a tip. Now I'd like to get back to my dinner." Marco held out his hand. "May I see the receipt, please?" And something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a request, and Carlos handed it over, watching as Marco's jaw tightened. "Sir, this receipt clearly shows a mandatory gratuity of $144, which you crossed out, and replaced with $20. That's called tip theft, and it's illegal in this state." The man tried to bluster. "That's not illegal. I can tip whatever I want." But Marco was shaking his head, pulling out his phone. "Actually, mandatory gratuity is part of the bill, not optional, and what you did constitutes theft. I'm calling the police unless you'd like to correct this situation immediately." The kitchen door swung open, and the entire kitchen staff emerged. Chef Antonio, sous chef Maria, line cooks, dishwasher, prep cook, all positioned behind Marco and Carlos like an army assembling. Their message was clear without words. You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. Chef Antonio spoke up, his voice carrying 30 years of authority. "Carlos delivers for us 3 times a week, always professional. He works harder than most people work in a month. And you think you can cheat him? Not in this restaurant." Maria added, her voice sharp. "We all survive on tips. We all know what it's like to be shorted, to be treated like we're less than human, and we don't let that happen here. We protect our own." The suited man's colleagues emerged, looking uncomfortable, and one said quietly, "David, just pay the man what you owe him. This isn't worth it." But David's ego was too invested. Marco's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Oh, here's what's going to happen. You are going to pay Carlos the full gratuity plus $50 inconvenience fee for making him stand here in wet clothes arguing for money you legally owe. And then you're going to leave my restaurant and never come back, because we don't serve people who steal from workers." David tried one more time. "You can't ban me. I'll leave a terrible review." But Marco laughed without humor. Go ahead. Tell everyone that Marco's Italian Kitchen stands up for delivery drivers and doesn't tolerate theft. Please spread that message as far as you can, because those are the customers I want." The standoff lasted another 30 seconds before David's colleague pulled out her wallet and handed bills directly to Carlos. $144 for gratuity, plus $50 for inconvenience, plus another $50 from me as an apology. Carlos stood there with nearly $250 in his hand, tears streaming down his face because it wasn't just about the money. It was about being defended, being valued, being treated like his dignity mattered. Marco turned to David, his voice final. "Now get out, and know that we all talk to each other in this neighborhood. We all protect each other, and your name is going to be shared among every owner and manager." As David left, the kitchen staff erupted in cheers, and Carlos found himself surrounded by people hugging him, telling him stories of times they'd been cheated and wishing someone had stood up for them. Marco handed Carlos a bag of food. "Dinner for your family, on the house, and from now on, when you deliver here, you use the staff entrance, because you're part of this restaurant's family." Jenny, the hostess, approached Marco with tears. "Thank you for doing what I couldn't." Marco put a hand on her shoulder. "Never be afraid to stand up for what's right here. I'd rather lose a customer than lose my integrity." The story spread through the delivery driver community like wildfire, and suddenly every driver knew that Marco's Italian Kitchen was a safe place, and drivers started requesting Marco's orders specifically. Carlos continued delivering 3 times a week, but now he was welcomed by name, offered coffee when it was cold, given umbrellas when it rained, treated like the essential worker he was. The restaurant's business actually increased after the incident, as word spread that this was a place with values, with integrity, where workers were protected and customers were expected to behave like decent humans. 6 months later, when Carlos's bike died, the kitchen staff pooled their tips and bought him a used electric bike, not charity, but solidarity, recognition that when workers support each other, everyone rises. Sometimes the bravest thing a business owner can do is stand up to a paying customer and say, "Your money is not worth more than my worker's dignity, and we'd rather survive with integrity than thrive on exploitation." Don't ever let anyone tell you that service work is unskilled or that the people who deliver your food are worth less, because they're working harder than most people ever will, and they deserve respect and fair payment. Carlos still delivers in that neighborhood, still works 3 jobs, but now when people try to short him, he knows there are restaurants that will stand behind him, kitchen staffs that consider him family. Hit subscribe if this story reminded you that solidarity between workers is powerful, that business owners can choose integrity over profit, and drop a comment below. Have you ever been cheated out of fair payment?